Hi everyone, welcome back to my tiny house in the forest. I hope you enjoyed my little walkthrough in the forest garden, because I thought it was a good way for me to introduce the garden as a whole. Even though this is a time of year where the garden looks a little bit sorry for itself, because some of the plants are dying down and some things are just heavily overgrown. But I thought the timing was great right now to talk about the successes and failures in my forest garden for the last couple of years, because obviously there are some difficulties if you want to, like me, grow your food in the forest. And I've gained a lot of new knowledge and insights from trying out different experiments in the garden for the last couple of years. But also I want to talk about the future plans for my forest garden, because I've realized that I need to make some major changes if I want to be more self-sufficient in the future. But I will talk about that in the end of this video. So one of the biggest lessons here in my forest garden is the one about sunlight, because even though it is a forest garden, I still need some light in order for my crops and my trees and my bushes to grow. And I don't like taking down trees, because I like this feeling of having a forest around me, and I also know that the trees are good for the microlife and the biodiversity on my property, so I don't want to disturb nature too much. But still, I needed to take down a very big tree that was standing to the south on my property this spring, because it took up a lot of sun in my garden. So I just needed to do that in order for the crops to grow. But it was a good trade-off, I think, because it was an invasive species, so the microlife and the biodiversity wasn't really adapting to that tree. It was just standing there and casting shadow into my property. So instead I planted a lot of new trees that are more local, that the microlife and the biodiversity more easily adapts to. And because that tree is gone now, they can grow faster and stronger, and thereby sequestering more carbon in the soil and thereby producing better soil quality. And yeah, so it's just a good trade-off. But still, I also have the very tall trees on this property just adjacent to my property, because they cast shadow in the afternoon, and that is also problematic, because it is the warm afternoon sun that is very good for many crops, and it's just a very big problem for me to have those tall trees so close to my forest garden. So ideally I should move the forest garden more away from those trees, so that the sun angle can hit the crops more easily than it is the case right now. And then the third thing is that when I laid out my garden, I had like this path that I walked you guys along just in the beginning of the video, and I just realized how much sun is actually on this path, so I'm not utilizing the space as well as I could in terms of utilizing the sunny parts of my garden. So I need to be doing some rethinking about the design of my property in terms of how I can utilize the sun. So another key learning that I've made in my forest garden is one about the crops that I can grow and the type of crops that I most certainly cannot grow. Because when you have a forest garden with a lot of shade, only some crops will do well. And I've learned that crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and pumpkins, I can grow those, but they don't grow very big in this garden at least. And maybe it's a question of design, maybe I can optimize it, but it is also just because they don't get so much sun in the afternoon because of those tall trees. So it is a bit problematic for them to grow like to normal sizes. And then also this year we had a lot of slugs here in Denmark, so it obviously set back my pumpkins and my squash for at least 1 to 2 weeks. Because they ate the plants every time I put them out. They ate the plants quite quickly and I couldn't fight them back. So when I managed to get them to grow, it was a little bit too late in the season. So now they are growing. Like the pumpkins here, they are growing widely, but they cannot produce fruit right now because it's too late in the season. But and also leeks and carrots, I haven't had a lot of luck with that. And also my asparagus, they grow well enough, but they don't get thick. So I think maybe they need some more nutrients and maybe they also need some more sun. So I will need to experiment with those as well. But some of the crops that I've learned actually do quite well in my forest garden are things like kale. This is a perennial kale, and I also have regular types of kale, like 1-year kale, annual kale. And I also have potatoes in the Hügelmounds. They have grown very big, and the beans, and also stuff like herbs and fruits and berries. So actually all my calories and my proteins and my vitamins I can get covered by growing those crops in the garden and then just have different types of them. So it's not totally horrible, but I think I will be focusing more on those kind of crops in the future that I know do well. And that is something that you do in permaculture. You look at what works and then you adapt your garden and your designs to whatever works and not trying to force nature into something that it doesn't want to do really. Another crop that I'm growing here in my forest garden that I don't talk too much about here on this channel is my mushroom production. Mushrooms like humid conditions and also a lot of shadow. So this spring I tried to make 2 different types of mushrooms. This one is oyster hat mushrooms on beech wood. And if I take off this cardboard that has just been placed around it to hold the moist, then I can actually see that the white mycelium is spreading throughout the log. And when it has done that through the entire log, then mushrooms will start to appear. So this should be well on its way. And in the back side here I have some oak logs with shiitake mushrooms. Also here I can see that the white mycelium is spreading. So hopefully in the spring of next year I will get mushrooms on this one. And at some point, I don't know when, also mushrooms will start to appear, I think sooner on these ones, but maybe during the winter. So I'm quite excited for that because this is my first production of mushrooms and I think it will go very well. Another important learning that I've made in my garden is one about the hügelkulturs or the hügelmounds, which is the little hill that you see behind me. So a hügelmound is when you have some logs in the middle and then you have branches and leaves and then you have horse manure and then you have soil on top of it. And then you plant different types of plants. It could be perennial and it could be annual on top of it. And they are very, very effective because as the years go by, the logs will decompose and then the plants can get water and nutrients from within the hügelmound. So in times of climate changes and in times of drought, it is much easier for your plants to survive if they grow on a hügelmound. So that is what I've made in my entire forest garden. It is made up of hügelmounds almost. But it can also be a little bit wild because everything will mingle in between one another, and my hügelmound has gotten a little bit out of control with the mint and the strawberries obviously. So I think that next year I'll maybe have a more simple growing plan for my hügelmounds because this is getting a little bit out of control. So less plants and more focused on what I'm trying to grow on each mound. Another thing that I learned with my hügelmound is that obviously the water runs off the sides pretty quickly because it has this shape. So therefore I made like small terraces on the sides of the hügel mound to hold back the water. And in those terraces I just put in some different types of kale and beans, and they absolutely thrived there on the sides because there was a plateau where they could grow more easily. So that was a little hack that I needed to make in order for my hügel mound to be more effective. But it is quite ingenious with hügelkulturs that you have this three-dimensional shape, because then you actually enhance the area where you can grow food compared to if you only had a flat surface. So what you see behind me here is the sorry remnants of my great tomato production that I had a lot of high hopes for in the spring, because I made this hügel mound in March, and then in May during the drought I actually planted out 5 different tomato plants, and just right from the start they grew very quickly, very big, and I didn't water them once. So it was just a testimony to how productive a hügel mound can be. But unfortunately, at some point the tomatoes just didn't evolve further because they needed some more sun in the afternoon to really ripe, and instead they got moldy. So it shows how productive a hügel mound can be, but it also reminds me that not all crops do well on the hügel mound. But I can conclude safely that the hügel mound is certainly very productive. And then at the other end, very controversially, I had potatoes in the hügel mound. Normally you don't plant potatoes and tomatoes next to one another because they can get diseases. But my potatoes did grow very big, so that was indeed a great success, and I definitely think I will be growing potatoes in hügel mounds also in the future. But right now this mound is just covered in grass, and it is a perfect harbor for slugs and snails. So I think I'll need to turn this grass around and then put soil on top of it, hopefully to kill it off during the winter before the next season starts next year. So I definitely learned a lot from my successes and failures in my permaculture forest garden. But I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me has been the realization that I can never be very self-sufficient on this property, because simply I need more space and I need more sunlight as it is. And that is just something that I have tried to accept, even though it was not the original plan. I wanted to be as self-sufficient as I could here on this property. And that was actually also why I wanted to build a new tiny house. For one, so I could get a little bit more space for me and my dog, but also so I could produce crops and have them frost-free during the winter and also be living more comfortably. And yesterday I was clearing this site for the new house, and then a horrible thought struck me, and that was of course that this piece of property is actually perfect for a kitchen garden. So if I wanted to expand my food production, it should be here, because it is at the southernmost point of my property, which means that I get the most amount of sunlight in here. I get the morning sun, the midday sun, and actually also the afternoon sun, because this is not right up against the tall trees. It's a little bit further away, so the sun actually comes in the afternoon. Yeah, and it was a very big thought, and I was kind of in shock when I realized that I needed to do this, because now I need to postpone the building project maybe by a week. But it's not a big problem, because I realized that this is what I actually have to do. And also it is actually better for the annex, because the new house would have interrupted the view to the meadow from the annex. And by placing the house a little further to the north, then I can actually overlook the new kitchen garden from the kitchen of the new house. And actually there will be a door right next to the kitchen where I can enter the kitchen garden through a greenhouse built on the new house. So it will be just a perfect situation with the kitchen garden and then the annex on the one side and then the new house on the other side overlooking the kitchen garden. So I'm actually pretty excited about this, even though it means that I need to take down 2 more trees and clear a new piece of my property for the new house. But sometimes you just like when you take down some trees, then you look at your property with totally new eyes, and then you see some new possibilities, and it feels in a different way, and then you get some new realizations about what you can do with this property. So that was at least what happened to me, and I'm glad that happened, because I can feel in my gut that this is totally the right decision. So and then I promised that I will start building the house by next week. I promised to make a video about that soon, but I just needed to explain all of this before I did that. That was all from me, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. So if you're further interested in videos like this, you can go check out my playlist about self-sufficiency and gardening. And if you're interested in learning more about permaculture, I made this video in which I talk about it in greater detail. So enjoy, and see you again next time.